Good afternoon, everyone. Great to see so many of you here this afternoon. My name's Paul Nelson. I'm a Press and PR Manager for World Travel Market, and welcome to WTM London 2017. So it's my great pleasure here to introduce to you the top 100 city destination ranking report, which Euromonitor International very kindly compile and put together for WTM London. So we've been working at WTM London with Euromonitor now for around 12 years, and each year they produce a really strong report with trends which will help all of you kind of guide your businesses as you go throughout the next 12 months to help you see where the trends are and where it is that you should be investing your time and money and resource to help your business grow. So before I introduce Volta, who's the lead researcher on the project, I've been told just to give you a quick reminder about the Flyto and making sure you use that to ask Volta and the panel of experts from Euromonitor any questions that you may have from the research. So without further ado, I shall invite Volta to the stage to do the presentation. Volta.
Thank you, Paul, and welcome everyone, and thanks for coming. Before we start, I'd like to show a little video first, and hopefully it works. So Euromonitor International has been working in cooperation with WTM for over 10 years to highlight travel trends which are set to impact the industry in the years to come. While we continue to do so in this year's report, for those of you who have seen past reports, you'll notice that there are some major changes with the reports that have gone before. So in an effort to provide more context around the trends that are discussed in the report, we have decided to integrate Euromonitor's top 100 city destinations ranking here. And in this ranking, we highlight the 100 largest cities worldwide in terms of international business and leisure arrivals. Now, combining the travel trends and the top 100 ranking is a great fit, we feel, as it allows us to provide a more holistic view of the travel industry today and tomorrow. Many of the travel trends discussed in this report are born out of opportunities and challenges that cities face, as well as their growing importance on the world stage. So let's start with a brief look at cities as global drivers of travel, and start with the top 10 city destinations of this year's ranking. So the top city for global tourism in 2016 was once again Hong Kong, with 26.6 million trips, benefiting from continuing arrivals from mainland China, as well as growing numbers of visitors from countries like Russia, Vietnam, and India. In second place was Bangkok with 21 million trips, and London in third with 19 million trips. And this top three is unchanged for the third year running now. However, Euromonitor's forecasting predicts this to change by 2025, when Singapore will leap into third with 30 million trips. Hong Kong will remain in front, but Dubai and Macau especially will push London down to fifth place. Now, in 2016, the top 100 cities accounted for 558 million arrivals, which is almost half of all global trips taken. And city arrivals generally outperform global arrivals, as you can see here. Urbanization is also continuing at a very fast pace, meaning that cities' pull factors for business and leisure travelers are continuously growing. Now, a closer look at the top 15 cities in terms of international arrivals shows some very interesting things. The top 4 has remained unchanged since our previous report, which looked at data for 2015 arrivals. As you can see here, we now also provide a 2017 forecast, which is based on data which was available before September of this year, as well as a longer-term forecast for 2020 and 2025. Dubai and Phuket are expected to see large growth, with increases of 11% and 14% respectively in 2017. The leader Hong Kong continues to decline this year due to a continuing strain in the relationship with mainland China, while Istanbul also sees a decrease of nearly 6% due to security issues. So let's dive into each region a little deeper and explore the trend that we have identified. Now, starting with Asia, where we are seeing smart cities driving a cashless revolution, and then moving on to Europe, where cities are acting as startup incubators. Since we are here together in the UK today, we have a special focus on the UK, where new real developments are connecting cities like never before. In the Americas, innovation is seeing voice and emotion recognition change travel. And finally, in Africa and the Middle East, opening borders is providing new and exciting travel and tourism opportunities. So let's start with Asia. And a look at the city ranking shows that Asian cities are really dominating the top 100 city destinations, with 41 cities in 2017 based in Asia. And this is likely to reach 47 by 2025, so almost half of all cities. Intra-Asian travel, particularly from China, is really driving this phenomenon. There's only one Chinese city in the Asia top 10, which is Shenzhen, which saw 12.6 million trips in 2016. And this again illustrates the strength of Chinese outbound tourism compared to inbound. Seoul sees a double-digit decline of nearly 15% in 2017. And this is due to tensions between China and South Korea, as well as concerns about North Korea, which are impacting its neighbors. Now, with the overall strong growth in arrivals comes, of course, a responsibility to ensure continued growth and sustainable expansion. To do so, Asian cities are steaming ahead with initiatives to become smarter cities. Seoul is one city leading the way, with all households, or nearly all households, already having access to broadband. And South Korea in general has planned for the world's first 5G network during February's Winter Olympics in 2018. A big step towards smarter societies is the growth of digital payment facilities. And in Asia, it's especially cities that are driving this cashless revolution. There's a push towards digital payments coming from governments, companies, and consumers alike. Euromonitor's consumer finance data shows that South Korea is leading the way with a nearly cashless society already. And while China is currently lagging behind with 50% of non-cash payments, it is growing rapidly, and especially savvy urbanites are increasingly using mobile payment apps to pay for their purchases here. One great example is the Chinese all-in-one app WeChat, which is a frontrunner when it comes to mobile payments. WeChat enables users to find and book trips, activities, restaurants, as well as scan QR codes to buy products. Peer-to-peer payments are also enabled on WeChat, which is very important. So even users without a bank account can use the app to receive and make payments. And this is very important in countries like China and India, where there is a very large unbanked population. And even economies like India, which is heavily cash dependent today, is seeing innovation. PayTM, which is means pay through mobile, is a company which is seeing success in cashless payments for second-tier and third-tier cities in India. Now, they launched a booking feature for railway tickets in 2016, and this is now the second largest retailer of rail tickets across India, only behind the train operator's own facilities. So cashless societies look set to expand in the future, with the growth of cryptocurrencies likely to continue across the globe. Governments and companies are looking closely at the success and development of companies like Bitcoin, where transactions are recorded in the blockchain, which is a peer-to-peer platform similar to PayPal, except without the intervention of a financial institution. Now, the impact on the travel industry could be immense. Paying for travel at the moment is probably not the first thing that people will be thinking of when looking at Bitcoin, but there are many ways, like through simplifying loyalty schemes, through smart contracts like travel insurance, how Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies can change the travel industry in the future. Okay, now let's turn to Europe, where different challenges are impacting cities, but startups are nevertheless flourishing. So taking a look at the top city ranking, London and Paris in Europe remain the leading cities, both retaining their global rankings of 3rd and 7th respectively. Security issues have affected cities differently, and with Paris and London remaining largely stable, while Turkish giants Istanbul and Antalya really drop in the rankings. Cities in relatively quiet and stable countries with similar climates like Spain, Greece and Italy are really profiting from the unrest in Turkey. Now, while tourism is important to many local and national economies, overcrowding is really changing the perception of mass tourism, and this is especially the case in Europe. Barcelona and Venice are some high-profile examples of European cities which have seen significant overcrowding at peak times. And Venice, for example, has now limited the number of cruise ships that come into the city. An analysis that you'll find in the report on population and traveler density shows as well that Amsterdam is particularly close to overcrowding. And again, Amsterdam as well has taken steps already to negate the negative effects of over-tourism. Now, while overcrowding is a very convoluted and complicated issue, which will need the collaboration of many different players, like governments and travel players, there are other travel pain points which a host of European startups are looking to address. Now, Silicon Valley remains the uncontested startup capital, but it's increasingly competing with European hubs for talent and investment. So some examples that we'd like to highlight of startups looking at travel pain points are, for example, London-based Airporter, which picks up luggage anywhere inside the M25 and drops it off at either Gatwick or Heathrow Airport. Working with British Airways, it can check in your luggage for you, so you don't actually have to look after your luggage or don't worry about your luggage until you actually get to the destination. Another startup is Flyto, although recently renamed to WonderPay, and they enable travelers to pay for their travel in installments, just like you can increasingly do for things like your furniture, your phone, your TV or your car. So Flyto or WonderPay will pay the travel company up front while making you pay back in installments, and it's backed by some very big players like MasterCard and Telefonica. Now, new businesses in Europe face the challenges of dealing with different regulations and agendas which do not necessarily always benefit entrepreneurs. However, the European Commission is now proposing a digital single market, which would enable startups to operate in each EU country under the same rules, which is very much needed. And scaling up also remains very much an issue for many startups, with European investors tending to be more conservative than their US counterparts, and thereby limiting expansion. Okay, like I said, we will be focusing on the UK as well, since we're all here today gathered. And in the UK, real expansion is really helping cities to connect. So first, a quick look at Brexit. You can't get around it. With the UK government triggering Article 50 in March 2017, the country will need to leave the EU by March 2019. A worst case scenario would be that of a no Brexit deal, as the Euromonitor team has put together. And what that means is that the EU and the UK negotiators failed to find a compromise, and the UK leaves the EU without having reached a new free trade agreement. And this would lead to a long-term decline in UK GDP growth. Now, the impact on tourism and on departures would be negative in this scenario. But arrivals would actually grow as the pound would likely remain weak, making the country attractive for international travelers. On the other side, we have the light Brexit scenario, and this would be more positive. The UK government relaxes its negotiating position over immigration in return for access to the single market, as well as passporting rights to preserve London's financial sector, which is very important. And under this scenario, UK GDP would actually grow, which would positively affect outbound travel as Britons would make the most of a strong pound. But on the other hand, it would dampen growth in inbound arrivals. Now, if we look at city arrivals in the UK, only London at the moment is present in our top 100 ranking. The UK had 35.6 million arrivals in 2016, that's the entire country. And with London accounting for 19 million, that shows that London accounts for over half of all international travelers coming to the UK. Edinburgh is the UK's second largest city with arrivals of only 1.6 million, so there's a massive gap there. Another interesting statistic is that the four major London airports, which are Heathrow, Gatwick, Stansted and Luton, saw over 158 million people pass through its terminals last year, while the next four largest airports in the UK, which are Manchester, Edinburgh, Birmingham and Glasgow, saw 100 million less, so only 59 million people passed through its terminal. So this shows how big a divide there really is between London and the rest of the country, and therefore making the rest of the UK more accessible is very important. Now, rail is identified as key to achieve better connectivity and movement of international travelers. So rail is already a prominent travel mode for domestic and outbound travel, especially in Asia and Europe. And with airport expansion continuing to stall in London, as well as air and road emissions causing localized pollution in major cities like London, rail is increasingly seen in a more positive light for the future. So currently, the Channel Tunnel is the only rail link between the UK and mainland Europe. And Eurostar holds the monopoly on passenger travel there. Now, the company is expanding its network with a direct link with Amsterdam starting in December 2017. And with a travel time of under 4 hours from London to Amsterdam on the train, it's believed that the rail provider can really start to compete with airlines on one of the busiest routes in Europe. And Deutsche Bahn is expected to bring some much needed competition on the line as well in the coming years. Now, Crossrail and the Thameslink program are set to improve connections between London and surrounding areas. And High Speed 2 will run from London Euston to Birmingham, Crewe and eventually Leeds in the north to improve connections there. Now, in May 2017, rail ticketing and distribution platform Silverrail entered into a definitive agreement with internet travel firm Expedia. And Silverrail processes over 25 million bookings per year. And Expedia's investment in Silverrail shows that the internet firm believes in the growing importance of rail and integrating rail on its rather flight-heavy platform. But rail is not the only solution, and looking to the future, rail is likely to see some heavy competition with businesses jumping into gaps that are present today. CityMapper is a transportation app heavily used in cities like London. And they have started operating a night bus in East London during the weekend. Using crowdsourced data through its app, the company noticed a shortage of good public transportation links in that part of the city, received a license from Transport for London to start running its own service between Aldgate and Highbury and Islington. And a little bit further fledged, Hyperloop One is the company which is being contracted to build the first Hyperloop connection between Dubai and Abu Dhabi. And they have proposed some other viable routes in Europe. And one eye-catching route is between London and Edinburgh, via Birmingham and Manchester, which would take 50 minutes. And while very much in the early stages, as I said, the Hyperloop could really make High Speed 2 redundant before it's even built. Once High Speed 2 is completely opened by 2033, travel from Edinburgh to London will still take 3 hours and 38 minutes, which is obviously a lot more than 50 minutes. So now let's take a look at the Americas, where cities are a source of innovation. So the US dominates the top 10 for the Americas, hosting 7 out of 10 cities. New York is the region's leader, expected to see 13 million trips in 2017. And trips to US cities have been affected, though, by a strong dollar and political uncertainty with Trump in the White House. And it's likely that actually cities in Canada and Latin America will outperform US rivals in 2017. Now, talking about Trump, as part of his policy to tighten border controls, Trump has ordered increased speed in implementing biometric scanners at airports. And data such as face scans, fingerprints and eye scans will be collected when travelers arrive into the country, but also when they leave. And that's done so that it's easier to verify who overstayed their visa, track terrorism suspects, and get accurate immigration data. Now, these advanced technologies are not only used by border controls, but we're also starting to see travel players being interested in this. In May 2017, for example, Delta Airlines announced it is testing facial recognition scanners at its check-in kiosks, with the hope that this will reduce the need for check-in agents and improve efficiency. Beyond facial recognition, voice recognition is widely lauded as one of the latest battle frontiers for travel, with Amazon's Alexa making a big splash in the home market. And brands such as Expedia, Kayak, Sabre have been quick to develop apps whereby consumers can receive information about flights, hotels, and in some cases even make bookings through Alexa. Now, hotel chains such as Marriott also use Alexa in hotel rooms as virtual concierges and for voice-controlled lights, room temperature, or to play music. But we'd like to take it a step further, and we expect that emotion recognition will be the next frontier. Software enabling emotion identification is likely to be integrated into consumer devices very soon. And adventure travel brand Explorer, for example, was one of the first to pilot this technology to help people when choosing a destination and activities. Other examples of companies using emotion recognition include Travelsify, which is an online hotel booking platform that allows users to pick a hotel based on their mood or emotional state. It has announced a partnership with Accor Hotels, who plan to use the technology in their search engine. Expedia, meanwhile, has opened a number of usability labs to analyze people's use of their website. And the lab records where users look on the screen and through facial movement, how what they see makes them feel. Expedia hopes that this emotional recognition can help improve its platform for different populations while reducing stress and frustration when booking a holiday. And beyond recognizing emotion through facial recognition, or facial expressions, the future might lie in reading emotions through brain activity. And there are already headsets that can do this, for example, from the company Emotive. And it's therefore not too far-fetched to see a future where, for consumers, reading their mind will literally lead to a greater sense of satisfaction with reality and their experiences with travel brands. Finally, we move to Africa and the Middle East, where we are looking beyond borders. Looking at the top 100 ranking, Dubai remains the city star of Middle East tourism, with 16.5 million trips expected in 2017, which is an increase of 11% on the previous year. This is forecast to increase by an amazing 10 million trips over the next 8 years to reach 27 million in 2025. And this is very much driven by a new visa on arrival policy for an increasing number of countries, as well as more affordable lodging options. The ranking is heavily concentrated around the Middle East and North African region, with Johannesburg the only sub-Saharan city in the entire top 100. This, however, might change in the future, and I'll talk about that more in a second. First, while the cities in the top 100 perform strongly, as you can see here, the strongest and weakest performers, this does not necessarily paint a complete picture. Many cities are dealing with turmoil, such as lingering fallout from security issues or health scares such as the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. And when looking beyond the top 100 ranking, cities like Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt and Sousse in Tunisia continue to suffer from a decline in visitors. While these cities used to be in the top 100, they have dropped out dramatically, illustrating the extreme effects that terrorist attacks and the subsequent response by local authorities can have on destinations. Now, as I said before, there's only one sub-Saharan city in the ranking. But some positive steps are being taken to change this. And in stark contrast to the US and Europe, where there are increasing calls for stronger border controls and barring certain travelers from entry, African leaders are seeing travel and tourism more and more as a way to boost the economic prosperity of the continent. So the African Union outlines its plans towards seamless borders in the Agenda 2063 policy document, and to this end, the African passport was launched in July 2016, allowing holders to travel visa-free to all 53 member states. And with visa requirements for all African cities in all African countries being abolished by 2018, according to the agenda. Now, while on paper the plans would greatly benefit the region and the travel industry, the proposals are mired in challenges, and much of the workings are still unclear. With major discrepancies in GDP per country, as you can see here, there are legitimate fears of one-way migration to richer countries, for example, like South Africa, which will need to be tackled. Now, seamless borders or even visas upon entry for more African countries will offer great opportunities to the travel industry. However, more needs to be done by the travel industry itself, with increasing route networks between regional hubs a key component of a more open Africa. While there have been some initiatives to increase domestic travel within Africa, intra-regional travel still has some way to go. And African tourist boards need to shift their focus, as many tend to concentrate on attracting European and North American travelers instead of their closer neighbors. So thank you for attending today. Thanks for your attention. You'll find a lot more information in the report, which is now available and can be downloaded. If you'd like to hear more about the report or about Euromonitor itself, please do come and visit us at our stand, which is in the Middle Eastern area, ME366. And I'd like to now invite the rest of the team onto the stage for a Q&A session. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Patricia McCannaford. I am actually a colleague of the travel teams. I work at Euromonitor International on the communications side. And my purpose today is to dig a little bit deeper into some of the themes that we heard today, and also allow time for everyone here to be able to answer their questions as well. So first, let me do a quick introduction. Nadia Popova is a travel project manager at Euromonitor. We have Caroline Bremner, who's the head of our travel and tourism research. And of course, Wouter, who's a senior analyst, also on the travel research team at our organization. So let me just open up. A couple of the questions I'm going to ask is something that we actually have heard quite a bit about just during our time here in WTM, let alone what's come up in the report itself. The last thing we talked about was Middle East and Africa. We understand, obviously, the negative impacts of political unrest, terrorist attacks. Do you see any signs of recovery for the tourism sector in the Middle East?
Well, perhaps I can take this question. I think Middle East is still very much a mixed bag in terms of performance and development, and this is really on the back of, the geopolitical issues that we're seeing, the security issues, but also the, low oil prices that have hit some of the destinations in that part of the world. Looking at their performance, of course, we're seeing some markets that are recovering, the likes of Tunisia, Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, although the very latest news from Lebanon, we see that, the prime minister resigned, so that might create further chaos. But looking at some of the bigger countries like Saudi Arabia, we can see that, the kingdom was definitely hit by the oil prices. And the government has decided to diversify its product offerings. I mean, traditionally that is the country that is very strongly supported by religious tourism, but that is not enough. And we're seeing efforts to open up a little bit, the very latest in terms of allowing women to drive, the facilitation of the visa procedures, which traditionally have been very lengthy and difficult process for tourists. And also there were some plans for the country to establish a new city with an investment of $500 billion US. So you can see that they're very ambitious. Saying this, whether they're going to find the funds, that is another question. Still, we see also the UAE being the, traditionally very popular destination, especially for source markets such as Russia. But they're also feeling the, macroeconomic impact. And if you take, for example, an airline like the Emirates Airlines, you can see that they have been struggling and they're trying to completely transform their operations, establishing partnerships with the low-cost operators. So overall, when you look at the region, you can see that everybody is trying to kind of find a way out of the difficult situation, no matter what kind of external impact has affected the demand or the interest of travelers. But I have hopes, similar to Egypt. This is one country that always finds a way out to go out of the difficulties and transform itself. I feel that the Middle East has that potential as well.
Right, thank you. And switching gears a little bit from recovery to bracing for impact, Brexit is very topical. So how do you feel that's going to impact the tourism sector in the UK?
Well, as Wouter explained during the report and the presentation, that there's two sides to Brexit. If you're looking at UK inbound, then we're seeing a strong sort of demand in terms of arrivals into the UK as key source markets from Europe, North America, Asia are seeing the low value of the pound. Obviously, we lost initially 15% of the value of the pound after the Brexit vote last June. But since then, it's rallied slightly, but it's still around 9-10% less than what it was. So actually, you're getting sort of really strong price proposition, value for money when you come to the UK, especially if you're North American, where the dollar is quite strong. So we're seeing that there is this kind of Brexit bounce, if you like, on the inbound side. Slightly different story on the outbound, because obviously, with the uncertainty as we go through the Brexit negotiations with the EU and our partners there, we don't yet know what the final deal will look like. So we are seeing a slowdown in outbound departures. We're also seeing, it's still positive. The latest figures from the ONS say that it's about 3%, but then it's 8% year to date for arrivals. So outbound is definitely struggling because of the slowdown in the UK economy and the pressures that UK households and consumers are under. If you consider rising import prices, we've had interest rates rise in the past week, so things are tough for households.
Anything you would advise companies to do in order to prepare?
Well, what we're seeing across the whole of the travel industry is the fact that brands need to be very focused on the customer experience, and that can take many different forms. We talk a lot about technology, the move online, the move to mobile. Already in the UK, 60% of UK sales to residents are via mobile. And what you have is this wealth of personal information that you can gather on your customers. And so using that big data, applying artificial intelligence, I just got a presentation over in the travel tech stage just today, the importance of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and using that to personalize the offer. So that means that you can really put in front of your individual consumers the best price, the best product, and ultimately drive sales. So definitely focusing on value for money, but leveraging technology to do that.
Right. Speaking of technology, I would love to pick your brain about this emotion recognition, but I do want to make sure we make time for some of the questions from the floor and our fancy app here that is letting us know some of the questions that you guys have already input into the app. So first question, we hear a lot about millennials. How do you think the new generation will affect or is affecting the travel industry?
Do you want it? Token millennial?
I'll start. So I think, like whoever wrote this question is right. We hear a lot about millennials, and we have heard a lot about millennials for a few years now. I think how they're changing the industry, we see all around us. Authenticity is very important. Experiences are very important. So players like Airbnb, which aren't really startups anymore, they're part of the landscape now, and you can't even think of the travel landscape without them anymore. They really came up on the back of millennials wanting to travel, as well as all intertwined with the global crisis and all these things. So that's how they're changing the industry. It's more tech, it's more seamless technology, more openness to trying new things, but also understanding what is authentic, what is not authentic, what is real, what is not real, and wanting to experience more, wanting to get away from their day-to-day life and having experiences that are special. And I think that's almost something that we've talked about for a few years now, and I guess Generation Alpha is the next one, and probably that's what we should be starting to talk about now, and seeing what they want. And maybe Caroline.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the millennials, we all know that they're very tech savvy, and there is a lot of targeting from the different different segments within the travel industry. And one example that comes to mind is Air France KLM, which recently launched a new brand called June, which is particularly targeting as an airline the millennials. And I think this is really in response to another huge, trend within the travel segment, personalization, making sure that you tailor your product offerings to the individual consumer, and making sure that you have that authentic, as Wouter mentioned, experience, but also you hear their feedback, especially when they're talking between peer-to-peer conversations on the social media. So I think a lot of brands are already considering this as part of their approaches and long-term strategies as well.
I'm just going to mention the millennials are the largest demographic who are working, so they're also changing business travel. And we know because of the sharing economy, work is becoming a lot less formal. So they're also wanting to have context-specific services. So they could be sort of traveling for work, but then within, later on that day, they want to go and do this authentic trip with their local Airbnb host. So there's definitely this idea that technology, again, can help power and ensure that, as Nadia said, you can personalize. But yeah, the millennials they're the forerunners of many of the trends that we're seeing in the industry today, for sure.
Yeah, it seems like flexibility needs to be a big part of the offering in order to appeal for that group. We do have another question. What is your forecast on the spending power of Europeans for travel in the next 5 to 10 years?
I can take that. Basically, when you look at Europe, Europe is the most mature destination. We have also sort of Germany, UK, all as sort of on the outbound side, very strong demand coming from those countries on the outbound side. But what you have in Europe is price pressure. We have the European Union with growth, which it's not as impressive as Asia. So, the fact that you have a slower economy because it's more mature, that does play into, the value for money that consumers are seeking. And definitely we were seeing already, when you look at the UK, it's a highly digitally connected society, and it tops Euromonitor's top digital consumer index. So again, being highly digitally connected, knowing that you can go online, use user reviews, TripAdvisor, all these different tools, meta-search, to get that sort of holistic view before you even purchase something. There's an enormous amount that you can, all these different tools to help you find the best deal. And I would say that Europeans are very savvy at that.
Great, and I do believe we should have an old-fashioned analog way to ask questions if there's a mic roving around. Are there any questions from the floor? Yes.
I'm Peter Gordon, I'm Chairman of Transportistics Users Group. Can you say a bit about your methodology? I'm interested, you mentioned you were looking at the UK, how many people visiting London and other cities. Do you only count people once, that is the city they spend the most time in, or do you include every city that people visit? And is it based on arrivals to airports, or is it based on something like the National Passenger Survey?
We count every city arrival separate. So if a person visits London and then goes to Edinburgh, we count that as an arrival in both cities. So we only count international arrivals, so we don't look at domestic, and we only count people as an arrival when they stay for 24 hours or longer. So any transfers in airports are excluded. The sources of where we get the information is different. We have analysts in all the countries that we track, where we track the cities for, and it really depends on the information that's available. We only look at the core cities, so not the metropolitan area. That's, again, something that might change us compared to some of the other rankings. But that really is what we look. So we take whatever sources, like you say, airport information, but airport information, like with the definition that I've just explained, doesn't necessarily align with what we track. So we use it as a source, but then interviews are very important for us. So we talk a lot to tourism boards.
So you're including VFR as well as package tours, holiday, everything like that?
Yeah. So we don't just look at like the more like paid accommodation or anything. We look at actual people that come into the city, and where they stay, we don't care really.
Any other questions from the floor?
I'm a 50% shareholder in a very small OTA. We're growing. The thing that's concerning me, the thing that's coming out of this event for me is data. Everybody is talking about data, collecting it and then sending it out. And everybody is clambering, it seems, to get their data in front of the clients. Is there a point at which there is going to be too much? Is there too much of this? Is it moving too quickly? And how do we put the brake on it?
I think that's a very, very interesting point that you make. And yeah, there does seem to be a lot of hype around big data. But we talk to a huge variety of people across the world about travel and tourism. And some of these people are not Google. They are small, medium-sized businesses. And they are able to capture their guests' information. They are able to customize, has that guest just got off a long-haul flight, or are they a domestic traveller and they've just driven 2 hours down the road? So you are able to just maximize the information that you have to hand. And if you need to go and scale it up, then obviously there's a wide range of people who are very talented at that. But I definitely, maybe Nadia can also chip in about the whole personalization. We've seen this happening in the industry for decades. That's what the luxury end did very well. But now, because of affordable luxury, people expect that in the mass market. And so data is one of the tools that you have, but you can't forget the intangible customer service. And we also see, players like Sabre, Amadeus, etc., developing tools for travel agents, developing tools for hotels, so that the people on the front line meeting the staff, the staff meeting the guest, that they have access to that information at their fingertips to again help provide this very personable experience. Nadia, on the personalization?
Yeah, I think also when you look at the travel industry, this is probably one sector where quite a lot of external, disruptors are impacting the activity. And it's very fast-paced, very dynamic, and therefore different companies have to very quickly adapt to that. And this is where the big data comes, to help, without understanding how to deal with those disruptors, whether that's the social media, whether that's Airbnb for the hotel industry or Uber for the transportation. So this, in a way, is helping hand for them. And going back to another example for the airlines, traditionally they have been sourcing their information from the global distribution providers like Travelport and Amadeus, and now they're realizing that they need to have that ownership of the data that they have, the big data that they have never analyzed before, and so that they can create a better rapport with their individual customer base. Whereas the GDSs provide more transactional information, which is extremely detailed, but not necessarily capturing the whole passenger journey from the moment the traveler starts to think where to go on holiday, whether it's going to be business or leisure, and when that person is at the airport, on board, and then at the destination. So I think the big data definitely contributes for that overall kind of understanding of what happens with those disruptors impacting the travel industry.
I'd say we have time for maybe one more question. We have a hand raised here. And again, if we're not able to answer, I know that there's some that have come through the Flyto app as well. Please feel free to email us or visit us at stand ME366 as well.
Hi, my name's Catherine Bullock from Face Marketing. I'm just curious about the trends in acquisition of travel companies, and we're seeing a lot of acquisitions from very large companies in the East now acquiring companies in the West. Have you done any analysis to look at what that might imply for the travel industry going forward? So, for example, you've got the recent acquisition of Jack Travel, you've got the ongoing MoneyGram acquisition by a key player in the Far East. What you think that might do to patterns of travellers coming one way or the other?
I can take that. Basically, one of the big news stories was when Ctrip acquired Skyscanner. And it's very interesting because Ctrip, dominate the Chinese market with over 70% of the intermediaries and the OTAs there. And they're very mobile-centric. So I think there's also the fact that they've acquired MetaSearch, the MetaSearch player of Skyscanner. There's that, integration. Skyscanner can learn from Ctrip and vice versa. Ctrip can plug in the Skyscanner functionality and the content. I was on a panel yesterday with a startup who's actually providing content to both those sites. So I think you will see this shift towards Asia because they have the dominant economies. China, India's coming up. We also have the emerging economies of Indonesia, Thailand, etc. So there's a huge amount of growth coming out of Asia, and it's very interesting to see that Asian companies want to look internationally. So I think it's also a sign of the very globalized world that we live in. But equally, it'll be up to local governments to also ensure that things look fine on the M&A side. There's certain questions about, this global brand has acquired X, Y, and Z, and all of a sudden they have a captive market. So, obviously something to keep an eye on.
Great, I think that's all we have time for, but again, make sure you download the full report, which is available online. If you do have any questions, I think we'll be able to stay a little bit after this presentation. And thanks to World Travel Market for hosting us. Thanks for you for attending, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.